All right. 8.4, learning about rational expressions, simplifying. So find the simplest form of each expression. The first thing that you have to do is factor. And it says state any restrictions on the variables. This is usually talking about a domain restriction, or it could be a range restriction. So really all we're talking about is the bottom of the fraction. Remember, the bottom of the fraction should not be equal to 0. So two numbers that multiply to get 10, add to get 7 would be plus 5, plus 2. On bottom, two numbers that multiply to get negative 10, add to get negative 3, minus 5, plus 2. Now, when we are doing our restrictions before we simplify, we have to look at this bottom. So my restrictions be x cannot equal 5. It also cannot equal negative 2. Because if it's 5, this whole thing would be 0. Multiplied by 0 would be no good. If this is negative 2, this whole thing would be 0. Multiplied by 0, whole thing 0, no good. And now, because there's multiplying, you can only cancel when there's multiplying. These two are the exact same thing, so those two cancel out. So my final answer would be x plus 5 over x minus 5. Now, you could have parentheses around these on both top and bottom, but you don't necessarily need them because there's only the one function on top and bottom. There you go. I'm going to do B. There's no adding or subtracting here, so I have to state my restrictions. Now, I have two variables on the bottom. There's no adding, subtracting. That means just the variable, so x cannot equal 0. I also have a y on the bottom. Y can't equal 0, because if either of those are 0, then it will become 0 on the bottom, which is be no good. When you're simplifying here, these two are common, so if I simplify that, that would be like a negative 4 on top. Just like 24 divided by negative 6 is negative 4. You can have a 1 if you want. Then like my x's, I'm subtracting, there's more x's on top, so x to the third, subtract x to the second, that's x just by itself, x. Then the y's, I would still be subtracting either one of two ways. 2 minus 3 would give me a y to negative 1, or I know there's more y's on bottom, so this would be my final answer with my domain restriction. You should do C and D by yourself. Multiplying. Now do not get confused, do not get scared. All of these are kind of like the same thing, it's just one more step. So the first thing we're going to do is factor everything. So I can factor everything, whoops, I do usually. Factor everything on top, multiplying. So multiply to get negative 6, add to get a positive 1, would be x plus 3, x minus 2. I have nothing with my x minus 5 here. Multiply to get negative 25, add to get 0, x plus 5, x minus 5. And on bottom, two numbers that multiply to get 3 and add together to get 4, x plus 3, x plus 1. Before I do anything else, I want to look at the bottom of my fraction right here. To my restrictions, I'm just going to go like this. Restrictions. X cannot equal a positive 5, x cannot equal a negative 3, and x cannot equal a negative 1. This said that equals 0, that is where the positive 5 comes from. If I said this one equal to 0 and solve for x, that's where the negative 3 comes from. If I said this one equal to 0, solve for x, that's where the negative 1 comes from. Now, since I have that, I can multiply. When you multiply across, really it's just the top getting multiplied together and the bottom getting multiplied together. So I'm not actually multiplying it yet. I'm not going to FOIL. Actually, you do not have to FOIL. You could just leave it like this as your answer. Not yet, actually. So now I look, where can I simplify? This can simplify this because, again, in between they're all multiplying, so I can simplify those. Anything else that's the same? Well, this one is the same as this one, so those two cancel. I can't cancel anything else, so what I'm left with is x minus 2 times x plus 5, and you do not have to FOIL, over x plus 1. So this, along with this, is your final answer. You do B by yourself. And please realize that you can take a 2, a number 2, out of 2x minus 8. And the last one, division. Oh yeah, first thing I should do is factor again. So when I'm factoring this, you should never have your leading coefficient, so that would be my x in this case, as a negative. So I'm going to factor out a -1. When I factor out that -1, this becomes x, and I'm changing my sign, so this would be -2. On bottom would be x plus 1, x plus 1. On top over here, multiply to get -10, add to get 3, x plus 5, x minus 2. And multiply to get 1, add to get 0. Now this is where it becomes tricky, because now I'm dividing. Now I'm going to do my restrictions, and actually I'm going to write them down here, because my final answer should be down here someplace. And I have the restriction x cannot equal -1. And x cannot equal -1, because these are both the same. I don't have to write it out twice. You can if you want to, if you just so deeply need to. Actually, 3 times. All of these would have the same domain restriction. You could write it out 3 times if you want to. Here, x cannot equal +1. I'm going to add that to it. Now, when I'm dividing, so this is what I have, and I'm dividing by a fraction. Dividing by a fraction is the same thing as multiplying by its reciprocal. So if I take this first fraction, this does not change. The first fraction does not change, because this is not what you're dividing by. And then you change it to multiply. You multiply by the reciprocal. So on top goes the x plus 1 and the x plus 1. And on bottom goes the x plus 5 and the x minus 2. Now this in division, this is where you have to be careful, because I have 2 new domain restrictions. One here and one here. So I have a new domain restriction at -5 and at +2. -5, +2. So now when I'm multiplying, I could just extend this division bar and look what's the same on top and bottom. So this is the same as this. This would be the same as this. Oh, and this would be the same as this. So all I have left is -1 on top and x plus 5 on bottom. You need to have that with your restrictions, and then I'll give you 100%. Does that sound just fantastic or what? You have a great, grand, wonderful time of your life right now. Oh yeah, fantastic. Watch out.